speech. Samson Itodo is the Executive Director of Yaga Africa. He joins us from our Abuja studios. Mr. Itodo, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me. Good morning to you all, and happy Democracy Day, Nigeria.
In reviewing the president's speech, let me throw in a question. So you will have the opportunity to review the speech. But he kept hammering on the fact that this democracy did not come cheap. Lives were lost, people were confined, he literally listed the level of sacrifice to bring us here. Talked about the forebears, heralding independence, June 12, consolidating on democracy. We must push it to prosperity. So in your review, in addition to your review of what the president has said, when you look at the handlers of today's democracy, whose responsibility it is to manage this democracy, how do you reflect it on the president's speech?
Well, once again, happy Democracy Day, Nigeria. I think that when you listen to the president, you give it to the president. He said all the right things that needed to be said. The kinds of rhetoric that you needed from a president on a day like this, I think the president delivered that to the Nigerian people. He gave, you know, just a historical journey of how we came, and the fact that this democracy that we have today, you know, came as a result of citizens who refused to stay quiet, who engaged intensely just to reclaim our democracy from authoritarians. He went ahead, you know, to deliver national honors to those who struggle for our democracy. And quite frankly, I would say the president said all the right things. But you see, when you look at a democracy and a democracy day of this nature, it's not about the rhetoric. It's about the manifestation and the expression of all the president said on the lives of the Nigerian people. I must say that data clearly shows that Nigeria and Nigerians believe in democracy, but they are not satisfied with this version of democracy that we practice. And what is this version of democracy? And you know, if we think about quotable quotes from the president's speech, I would like to take one. He said, democracy only works when citizens trust the process. That's what the president said. And let's take that quote. The bigger question is, do Nigerians, as of today, trust the process? The answer is no, because data clearly shows that Nigerians don't trust the democratic process for a couple of reasons. One, you cannot say we are celebrating democracy when we are dealing with elite capture and capture of our democratic institutions. You have the National Assembly. And the bigger question, when you look at the National Assembly, in particular, this one or even previous assemblies, you ask yourself, to what extent have they held the executive to account on some of the promises and its responsibilities? The truth is, you have a National Assembly that is struggling to hold the executive to account. If you look at the scrutiny of legislations, because why you have powers shared between different agencies of government is to hold power, is to keep the executive in check. Unfortunately, we haven't seen that from this particular National Assembly. Yes, whilst this National Assembly may have passed progressive legislations, and I'll say, for instance, the House of Reps to a large extent performs way better than the Senate, the bigger question is we're dealing with institutional weakness. And therefore, when the president said democracy thrives when citizens trust the process, I hope the president is aware that majority of Nigerians don't trust the process. This is why you have low turnout in elections, because citizens don't trust the process, because INEC as an institution is either captured by operational or there's limited access to the resources it needs to function. When you look about human rights and think about even the way our political parties work, we've just come out of a primary process. How do you expect citizens to trust a process that did not meet the test of transparency and accountability? We've not gotten it this bad. At this material point, primaries have been conducted, and aspirants and candidates and those who purportedly voted don't even know the outcome of the process. Do you also want to talk about the state of security? Again, the president makes a profound point that democracy without security is not enough. Those were the president's words. And I agree with him that it's not enough because the welfare and the security of Nigerians is what the Constitution says is a primary purpose of government. And if you have this insecurity, you know, on an astronomical rise, then you question whether we are indeed a democracy. And I dare say that, yes, we will renew our faith in democracy. But if democracy, if citizens don't feel the impact on their daily lives, then all we simply do is marking a date called June 12th. And because it's not translating into improved quality of life of Nigerians.
Indeed, and there are other interesting parts of the president's speech. You were talking about data, and speaking of data, when he addressed the matter of insecurity, he did say that terror-related deaths are down by 81% since 2015. And over 13,000 terrorists have been neutralized in the past year. Another data that is significant to note is over 124,000 fighters and dependents have laid down their arms. I wonder how significant these, portions of data are to you as it relates to the current realities in the fight against insecurity. And the part where he also left the door open to bandits and kidnappers to lay down their arms, saying that this window will not be open forever. How also does it tie with the fight against insecurity, especially with conversations around the controversial nature of the Operation Safe Corridor program?
Now, on the point about security, and again, to go back to the president's speech, on a day like this, one would expect that the president outlined some of the programs and policies that his administration is undertaking. Give it to the president. He did a fair job of outlining all the actions taken, whether it's electricity, in the economy, and he talked about security. So I give it to him, he outlined it. The bigger question, it's now left for us to properly scrutinize this. So when you look at the whole discourse, on insecurity and the data, yes, there have been some gains. And I think that we won't sit here and say there haven't been gains. This administration has recorded some gains in its efforts to combat terrorism. But the fundamental question is, how come that few days ago, in the Senate and in the House of Reps, there were questions raised as to funding for our security operations, and that there hasn't been a thorough account? Because if you say you've increased the funding, how come we still have army officials complaining about their welfare, about the state of their equipment? It appears there's a mismatch between what is the reality on ground and what the administration is saying and its investment in security. These are not my words. There were senators in the National Assembly who were raising questions over this point about insecurity. And they are senators from the ruling party. So let no one say that I am the one actually raising these questions. It is based on what transpired on the floor of the Senate, if you recall, just last week. When you also look at how we've managed communications, and one of the troubling things is, yes, whilst Nigeria and the US have been in partnership, in tackling insurgency and insecurity, I think that the communication of that to the Nigerian people has been managed poorly. Often we wake up and hear about successful operations, from the President of the United States. And the question you ask yourself is, what is really happening within our security management system, especially regarding communications? How effective is the Nigerian state communicating to citizens regarding the extent of the operations? What is the impact? Are there collateral damages? This information is not out there in the public, and Nigerians ought to know what their government is doing regarding security and what the impact that it has. When you come to the point the president made about recruiting more officials, just look at what's happening. We're currently dealing with, this kidnap of children, including the brutal killing of a teacher. It's really sad that we are really at this point. And I just want to call on the president, who has made this commitment to protect the Nigerian people, including the governors of those states, to work tirelessly to bring back those kids. Because if you are a parent and you have a child, you know the pain and the anguish you go through when you are unable to protect your child. And so I think that when it comes to security, there's so much more that this administration needs to do to inspire trust and confidence on the minds of Nigerians that they have a government that is fulfilling its responsibility in securing the Nigerian people.
When they say that elections have consequences, I think people refer more to June 12 without knowing it, because at the heart of this was an election process that a lot of people still describe today as one of the best, and eventually it was annulled, upturned. And whatever we do today, we can never go back in time to fix that. But it looks like we may be treading down that path yet again in another manner. Interestingly, the president started his speech with elections. Quite interestingly, referred to the coming elections, and that is your constituency, right? But I'm particular about what kind of elections we're conducting now, what kind of elections we're building up to. And I think you hinted that when you referred to the primaries, for example, across parties. While we've not had elections annulled since then, we've had elections that the people did not trust, that the people chose not to participate in. In fact, the coming elections, and I think you also referred to that, the level of trust may just be low. And these are the building blocks to that point. So when you look at the political class, are they really better off? As I said, we may not be annulling elections now, but are we better off in any way? And I'm talking across the board, because I'm looking at all the major political parties, and it's the same thing. A simple primary, party primary. As the elections are being written or being decided who is going to get more votes, they're not allowing even the party members to decide who will be their flag bearers. So are they better off, even though they're not annulling elections?
I don't think they're better off. I think they're actually worse. I listened to the Senate president a few days ago talking about, the primaries and said that governors should determine, and governors should be elected to determine members of the state houses of assemblies. In other words, what's the essence of a primary? That if governors are the ones deciding who comes to the State House of Assembly because they're going to work with them. He also said that the president should be allowed, to determine those who come to the National Assembly. It's the most unfortunate thing I have heard in recent times regarding our democracy. Why then do you have primaries? Why then do you have party members? What is being done is absolute capture of the leadership recruitment process, taking power away from the people. And so you can't say we are celebrating democracy on a day when Nigerians decided to vote for a president of their choice through popular expression of that will. That is why we celebrate Democracy Day on June 12th. But today, you have political leaders telling Nigerian people that men who hold power should determine for the people who should represent them. I think that it's not just an anomaly, it's an indication of democratic backsliding over the last 27 years. When you come down to even the way the primaries are, you can see across the parties, they are providing all sorts of flimsy excuses as to how the primaries were managed just to justify the imposition of individual preferences over the people. I think what the parties have told Nigerians and members of those parties is that you don't matter and you don't have a place in determining, who should take the party's ticket. In other words, anything we give you, just take it. And that is not what democracy is. And I have said consistently that do not think about credible elections in 2027 when the party primaries were already flawed. Because the same attitude that the parties and the political leaders have expressed in the course of the primaries, they're going to import that to the general elections. Therefore, INEC is going to be left handicapped because it's going to come under unnecessary and intense pressure. You clearly see what is happening today. Nigerians don't trust the electoral process. Majority of Nigerians. We can choose to lie to ourselves, but the data clearly shows that Nigerians don't trust the electoral process. I expect that on a day like this, we should be introspecting about what kinds of steps can be taken to inspire trust on Nigerians so they can show up at the next elections, so they can accept the outcome as a true reflection of the will of the people. But as it stands, we have our concerns, about how this process is being managed. And I just hope that Nigerians will not feel defeated. And our message to Nigerians on June 12th is that the same way we reclaimed democracy in 1993 by Nigerians refusing to stay quiet up till this moment is the same way we should refuse to stay quiet in the build-up to the 2027 elections, and we should show up and reclaim our state and not let, politicians who are determined to impose themselves and capture the democratic process for their own benefit and not for our collective gain to have their way.
So let's talk about how will Nigerians reclaim their democracy? Because the managers of our democracy, sometimes when you look at it, you ask yourself, is democracy in safe hands? When you look at the way the people who are at the helm of affairs think about democracy, how they define loyalty, how they define party politics, it's very disturbing and very, very obnoxious. Like you rightly articulated, the issue of state capture, the issue of leadership recruitment process capture is all over the place. So let's go back into the political parties themselves, because one thing is sure, it is what they present to the public that the public will vote. So that's why sometimes we have the worst of us leading the rest and the best of us. So where can citizens start from in managing this entire process? So for instance now, there are parties, as you articulated, that don't even know who their candidates are because the politics is going on. So I asked myself, why then did you do the primaries if eventually you're going to decide who goes? So where do we begin from within the political parties themselves? Because outside the political parties it's easier, maybe not as easy as said, but at least that mobilization is a possibility. But within where the capture happens, where do we begin?
I think Nigerians need to acknowledge the following things. The first one is that democracy isn't just about elections. That the actual work of defending and advancing democracy begins after elections. So that's one, notion that Nigerians should have. The second is, whilst democracy remains the best form of government, it has its own inherent challenges. And those challenges sometimes can undermine its capacity to deliver on the people. And that despite its challenges, authoritarianism or military rule is not a substitute at all. Because sometimes you see this clamor for unconstitutional changes of government and authoritarianism, and I dare say that it is not an alternative and it shouldn't even be considered. The third point is when you think about democracy and democratic participation, the best way you can reclaim that is by being vocal and engaging at the lowest unit. The biggest tragedy for our own climb is that there's a lot of concentration on what happens on the center. Yes, it could be a function of some of the structural challenges or defects that we had, but that is being addressed with this whole local government autonomy being advanced or local government financial autonomy being advanced. But the key question is, every Nigerian resides in a local government. Do you know your local government official? Do you know who represents you in the legislative council? Are you engaging your leaders and demanding accountability at that level. You have members of your state houses of assemblies. To what extent are you engaging your state houses of assemblies? Then you also have at the national level. I think that these different levels of engagement is critical, for reclaiming democracy. The second point is about voting at elections. INEC is currently conducting voter registration. The last couple of days, there have been challenges, but we understand those challenges have been addressed. And where you go to register and you still have hiccups and challenges, please speak out. Ask questions, amplify them. And I think voting at elections is also very critical. This 25% turnout for presidential elections, where the minority of us determine for the majority of us, is something that we all need to decide that we would reverse, in 2027. And I think membership of political parties is also very, very critical. Democracy is a journey. It's not a sprint or a one-off event. It takes competition, it takes debate, it takes constant engagement, but folding your hands and not speaking out and not doing anything, it's one way to make democracy die prematurely, especially in a context like Nigeria, where we're dealing with different forms of fragility.
The president also addressed, young persons in his speech, and, without quoting him copiously, he did say that you may criticize me, but never stop believing in Nigeria. And he also addressed the matter of, as Kade mentioned earlier, not jumping ship, build here, code here, vote here. But again, if we related that to the democratic process, I wonder if, from where you sit, you see a healthy space for young persons to find political expression, because the conversation has always hovered around, the older political elite dominating the democratic process. And despite the, historic not too young to run law, how much progress has been made from the political space that we have now, even the emergence of new political parties. Have you seen that space for expression with all the institutional structures put in place for young persons?
Well, in fairness to the president, you can give it to President Bola Ahmed Tinubu that in this whole democracy journey, he's one president that has appointed the highest number of young people in his administration. You give it to him. Now, when you look at, the interventions around young people, and some will talk about the NEL Fund, you talk about different programs being implemented. Yes, to a large extent, there is visible programmatic interventions targeted at young people in that particular light. But when you look at, in terms of political representation, and again, it's sad that even after the primaries, we can't really account for the number of young people who have emerged from the primaries, because the parties are yet to publish the outcomes of those primaries. Well, when you think about, how young people are making contributions to the government, whether through formal or informal means, you say there's some measure of interventions in that regard. But the bigger question is, when you look at, the youth population, particularly the Gen Zs, their biggest worry and anger and frustration with the political class is a failure to listen to them and to address some of the challenges that they face. They are grappling with all forms of police brutality. Yes, the IG of police, the new IG of police, seem to be addressing those situations. But just few months or few weeks ago, we saw what happened with the extrajudicial killing in some states of the Federation. When you look online and see how young people are expressing different forms of frustration, they feel they are not being heard by this government, especially regarding jobs, regarding security, even the quality of education. Again, I note some of the reforms being introduced by the current Minister of Education. But quite frankly, they aren't seeing the impact of these policies on their daily lives. And it doesn't make any sense to them if they don't feel the impact of these policies in their daily lives.
Whatever happened to that National Youth Conference? That was something a lot of people looked forward to. So maybe your parting shots now, gentlemen. Mr. Itodo, you first. Whatever happened to that, or is it something that is still coming up? Should we still be expecting? We'll take your final thoughts, and then Mr. Professor Adibe's final thoughts as well.
Well, Kayode, during the inauguration of the committee, I was very clear to the president, and I mentioned 4 things. And the first thing I said was, 1, he needs to provide the resources for the youth confab. He needs to strip and insulate the youth confab from politics. He needs to express commitment to implement, the recommendations from the youth confab. All those things I said on record in the council chambers when the committee was inaugurated. As of today, I am not particularly aware of any move that has been made in that regard. There were several plans and preparations, but I think that the government of the day will respond, should respond to that question, because quite frankly, I do not have any of them. In any case, I have moved on, from that particular responsibility months ago. But I think to my parting shot is to end where the president said that, democracy without security is not enough. Nigerians expect that this democracy that they practice and those who are at the front lines should provide that security to the Nigerian people. Only then can we say that, yes, democracy is delivering on its promise. But so far, so good. Nigerians feel really insecure in their country, and that is really unfortunate.